the previous videos, we mentioned about the characteristic of a good assignment report. It should be specific and custom-made for your project. It should have adequate qualities and depth. It should effectively communicate thoughts, ideas, and knowledge. It should be concisely written. It should be readable. It should have good summaries of the significant contents, and it should be coherent. What you see here, producing a good report, is not as easy as normally students think of. It is not just a compilation of statements and informations so that the informations can be delivered to the readers. You need to achieve far beyond this. You need to consider the effectiveness of the delivery of informations as concise as possible, as easy to understand as possible, and you need to ensure the accuracy of the informations given, which should be coherent, which should be correct, properly verified, and should have adequate qualities and depth in the technical aspects. Now let us proceed with some common mistakes in producing a report for the assignment. First, long report is not necessarily better. We mentioned about this previously. It is more challenging to produce a concise report as compared to the long report. In order for you to produce a concise report covering all the necessary informations, and every single statement must be meaningful and impactful, it requires several rounds of vetting, cross-checking until to an optimized state. The sentence must be optimized, the sequence of informations must be optimized, and the message given to the readers are also optimized. This will save the times of the reader reading through your report. You have to discard all the irrelevant informations and pay more emphasis on those which is significant. This will require you to first identify which is important and which is not important. Those which are important, you must incorporate inside the report, and it should be emphasized. As for those which is less important, you will need to decide whether it is relevant or irrelevant. Those which is relevant, you will need to incorporate in the report, only with less emphasis, as they're going to serve as supporting informations to complement those which is significant. As for those which are irrelevant, you will need to remove it from the report. That means in order for you to produce an optimized, short, concise report, there should at least be several drafts. Each draft will be more concise than the previous one, without compromising in terms of the quality of the information given to the readers. That makes the short and concise report more challenging than the long reports. And you need to know that the report is submitted to the lecturer as a part of the assessment, which is used to evaluate your understanding and your ability to communicate ideas. Producing a good report is also a part of the assessment. It gives a lot of significant information to the lecturer, not only knowing the concepts and principles related to the course. It is also to demonstrate your level of understanding regarding the project, your ability to apply the concept for that particular project, your ability to identify which is important, which is not important, and which are irrelevant, and also the ability to communicate the thoughts to the readers. Next, writing report is not like writing the textbook or giving lecture. This also normally happens among the students. Somehow, most of the students feel they are obligated to explain everything from the head to tail, even though those are not actually closely related to their project. For example, when the Power Foundations is being used, typical students will give explanations on different types of foundations, which include the footing, street footing, strap footing, rough foundations, Power Foundations, and etc. All these explanations normally come before the report zoom into the Power Foundations at the later stage. When all sorts of foundations are being explained, and then all these are explained halfway, you will have difficulty in terms of the depth of discussions, as you only explain those halfway, and also you give a misconception or wrong expectations of the readers that you're going to utilize those foundations for your project, which eventually none of them are relevant to your project. You have to be careful with that. The focus here will be the depth of the knowledge, as it is related to diagnosing the problem or the conditions on site, which will lead to certain decisions and justifications in terms of the selections of the type of foundations to be used. And then there will be in-depth analysis in terms of the loops that are adding onto the foundations. And then there will be a series of complicated design process to check every single aspect of the foundations, which will give you the design outcome. And all these design outcomes will need to be further verified and properly discussed. This is what we are talking about in terms of the depth of informations being given in the assignment. Therefore, it should be specific and custom-made to your project. It is not a textbook, it is in fact a design report. Why you do this? Why you do that? What are the outcomes? Another common mistake about producing report is that the students are too guided by the reference or the literature. It is inevitable for students to refer from the textbook, from the samples of seniors, from the lecture notes, and etc. It is the expectations of the lecturer that students synthesize the knowledge, digest it, and convert it into something useful, custom-made for the project. However, most of the students, they pay more emphasis in terms of the informations, forgetting to demonstrate the digestions and synthesis process of the knowledge that acquired from the reference. It is only when students can translate all those informations into something which are of their own to prove that the students really know how to apply those concepts and principles. The students should not be too guided or too influenced by the informations given by the references, which is rather passive in terms of the mode, in terms of how information should be delivered, what kind of information should be incorporated, what are the sequence that the information is to be delivered to the readers. Every reference have their own ways to do it. And this is the main reason that when students refers to some references too extensively, taking information from different sources, it will be as if something being cut and paste to produce a report. The writing style is not consistent. The approach and how the message are being delivered is also not consistent throughout the report. The bottom line here is the students must digest the informations and produce their own report independently. You have to take the initiative, putting yourself in the active positions, that you own the knowledge and you decide how it is being delivered to the readers. Next, not to include irrelevant informations. We mentioned about this before. And then there will be abbreviations, but when you use the abbreviations, you make sure they are properly explained. You cannot simply display the abbreviations and expect the readers to know their meaning without explanations. Another one is related to improper format of citations. I guess by the time the students are undertaking the reinforced concrete design, which normally happening at the third year of the university program for engineering, most of the students are aware of the importance of doing citations. That means whichever source of information that you use in your report need to be properly cited. Only that they may not do it in the right format. You know that doing citations is very particular in terms of the format, as well as the information to be given to the readers, so that the readers is able to trace the relevant literature. It should be properly cited. There are a lot of information from the internet, and there are various types of formats. The most common one it would be the numbered system, the Harvard system, or the APA system. Maybe you just focus on this few. If it is not clearly stated by your lecturer which format to comply with. And you have to be careful when you do the citing. It depends on the source of the reference, which in turn the numbers of the authors. If there is only one or two authors, you're going to list out the first name of the author, which is the family name or the surname of the authors, together with the year of publications. Something like this. But when you have 3 or more authors, it will be more difficult to list out the names of the authors. Then you just write the name of the first author, putting an editorial behind, followed by the years of publications. By looking at this editorial, we know that there are going to be 3 or more authors. And remember that when you have those being cited in your text, the relevant details needs to be displayed in the reference list. It cannot just simply citing without providing the relevant informations. You need to allow the readers to be able to trace the source of publications. Another thing about the citations is that the students simply citing for the sake of citing. Some even copy the citing from the other source without actually going into cross-checking the accuracy of the informations. This sometimes will end up there are citations on certain point, but when you trace the original source, nothing was mentioned in the original source. That means you are giving the wrong informations in terms of the citing. This one you need to be careful. You can't just simply cite somebody without actually checking through the original source. And then not everything that you need to cite. Normally you need to cite the findings of somebody or certain important points as given by somebody. But if some piece of information which is too common, nearly known by everybody, there is no point for you to cite that. Most likely, nobody is able to trace who is the first person that giving you the informations. They can't find their ancestors. Therefore, when you do the citing, you cite something which is really impactful and important. It shouldn't be something which is common sense. Next, be careful with the plagiarisms. Plagiarism means that you copy from somebody else's work. It can be part of it, it can be a whole lot of it. Some universities have the requirement that the assignment reports are to be checked against the plagiarism by using the software Eng-aim or other plagiarism software. Some universities may not have that policy, but it doesn't mean that it is not important, and the lecturer can still trace whether you have done plagiarism or not. This can easily be cross-checked by your lecturers. First, we can look at your writing style. Some writing seems to be too good to be true, and if we see the overall report, you see a lot of poor writings. suddenly 1 or 2 paragraphs, nearly perfect, having advanced writing style, and not to the habits of the local people. For example, non-native English speaker. Some writings obviously are from the native English speakers. We know that most likely is going to be plagiarism. We can simply quote this statement, put it into the Google search. Most likely we are able to trace the source. There will be some sections seems obviously cut and paste, which is based on the experience of the lecturer, and also serious inconsistency in terms of the writing style and quality. Some area extremely good, some area extremely poor. This is also quite obvious to the lecturer. You know that our focus of the discussion here is not only about the plagiarism. We have to go back to the purpose of the assignment as well as the purpose of the assignment report. The assignment is designed for you to learn through the task given to you so that you can apply the knowledge and concepts into the project. It requires you to digest and synthesize the knowledge, which if you rely too much on the plagiarism, copying and getting the whole lot of the informations from the other references, you do not actually fully engage with the learning process. And then the purpose of having the report for your assignment, it is for you to practice how you're going to communicate and deliver message through writings. And now that you quote everything from your reference, that means you are not taking part in the learning process to communicate your ideas through writings. That is the utmost concern of your lecturers. Next is about the symbols, whether you're going to italic it or make it non-italic. First, all the symbols in the equations need to make italic. When you mention all those symbols in the text, it should also be italic. The non-italic symbols, it will be perceived as if and abbreviations. If you are talking about symbols, which later is going to be substituted with numbers, it should be in italic form. If it is non-italic, that means it represents a name. That will be the differences between the italic and non-italic words. And you have to be careful with the subscript and the superscript. This one is the editorial problem, which normally students overlook this. But you know that your lecturer is going to see this every semester. It is very easy for them to detect those. It may not be significant to you, but it is glaring to your lecturer. Those which is supposed to be subscript and superscript, you should do accordingly. Another one is the inconsistent font type and size, as well as inappropriate font type. Sometimes, due to the compilations of the words of different students, different type of the fonts may appear throughout the report. The editor for this report need to standardize this throughout your entire assignment report. The size should be appropriate. The type should also be appropriate. Normally for the printed report, we are talking about the Times New Roman 12 pt. You need to keep in mind in this size, that one is for normal text. You can have the entire reports in the same size, or you might want to vary slightly in terms of the titles and subtitles. And the differences in terms of the size of the font shouldn't be too significant, so that it looks harmony and comfortable. And when you come to the figures, the font size should be more or less similar to the normal text. It shouldn't be too big and it shouldn't be too small. You need to maintain a good consistency in terms of the font size in every part of the report. Since that we're talking about the figures, poor resolutions is another problem. Normally students use print screen in order to extract certain figures. When come to printing, the resolution is poor, the figure become blur, which is very hard to read. If you could try to reconstruct the figures, you can learn how do you reproduce the figures and put it into your design report. Don't use print screen, and you will see significant inconsistency in terms of the resolutions whenever come to the figures. There is another common mistake. It is when you want to present your tables, especially when there are symbols or abbreviations in the tables. It needs to be properly explained. You should put some footnotes there so that the readers are able to understand the meaning of the abbreviations or the symbols. This table itself needs to be standalone. That means by looking at the table themselves, the reader should be able to understand the information given in the tables. The next common mistake is insufficient information given by the students regarding the project. In another word, is that the design considerations is not thorough. Some are not properly listed, which suddenly appear in the middle of your calculation steps. Some are not properly justified, and it is not clearly stated of your assumptions. You need to provide more information regarding the project, especially those that can influence the design outcome. If there are assumptions involved, you need to make clear of those assumptions. For example, where is the project located? What kind of soil conditions? Any problem with the groundwaters? Is there any access to the road? How about the drainage conditions of the site? And etc. All this will affect the design in some part of your calculation steps. That means when you produce these sections on the design considerations, you will need to always cross-check with your calculation steps. Make sure all the necessary informations are given upfront in the section before you can proceed with the calculation steps. You will need to concisely list the design considerations, specifications, references, justifications, equations, checking criteria in order to give reader a quick glance. This one is talking about an effective way to summarize your informations. There will be informations as an input, there will be informations as a process, and there will be informations as an output. Normally, students have no problem with the calculation steps, as they can closely comply with the calculation steps as given during the lecture. Those are at the micro level. After you accomplish this step, you need to go for the next step and then subsequently to the next one until you obtain the result. These are rather detailed and at the micro level. You should also provide information as an overview to the readers, which is at the macro level, giving the readers a quick glance. What are the inputs? What are the process? And what are the outputs? What you see here, it goes back to our previous discussions regarding the readability, which you need to cater for different types of the readers. Although a report looks like single dimensions, but when you construct the design report, you have to consider multi-dimensions. You have to consider the situations when the readers is reading every single word, and also when the readers only read the first sentence in each paragraph, and you have to consider the conditions where the reader is going to read from the start to the end of the report, as well as for the readers who do not actually follow the sequence as outlined by your sections. You will need to make sure every type of readers are able to comprehend the most out of your report. That means you have to cover both the micro level as well as the macro level and ensure the coherentness in terms of the informations given throughout the design report.